I'm Lee Posey, Senior Committee Director with the Education Committee at the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, and thank you for participating in this event. NCSL is a bipartisan organization representing the nation's state legislators and state legislative staff. NCSL works to improve the effectiveness of state legislatures, promotes policy innovations in the state, and ensures that legislatures have a strong voice in Washington, D.C. We're happy to provide this opportunity to highlight an important education topic. State policymakers are well aware of the importance of teachers. They know that research consistently demonstrates teachers are the greatest single school-based factor affecting student achievement. So they want to ensure that at-risk students have access to fully prepared, experienced, and effective teachers. This afternoon, we have two experts who are going to help us dive into this complex issue. First, we'll hear from Amy McIntosh with the Department of Education. She's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the Department. She joined the Department in January 2014 after serving for 3 years as a Senior Fellow on Teacher and Principal Effectiveness with the Regents Research Fund under the New York State Department of Education. Previously, she served as Chief Talent Officer and other roles in the New York City Department of Education beginning in 2004. She came to education after 20 years in the private sector, most recently as Senior Vice President with Dun & Bradstreet. After we hear from Amy, we'll hear from Ellen Burstock-Sherritt. She's a Senior Research and Policy Analyst on at AIR's Education Quality Team. Dr. Sherritt has been conducting studies of teacher salaries, teacher shortage, and teacher effectiveness for over 10 years. She's served as consultant to state education agencies, including the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Ohio Department of Education, the Maine Department of Education, and the Massachusetts Department of Education. She provides technical assistance on teacher salaries and related teacher effectiveness policies to local and state education agencies through the Teacher Incentive Fund Technical Assistance Network and the Federal Center on Great Teachers and Leaders. Dr. Sherritt has authored or co-authored numerous reports and policy briefs in 2 books. She's going to show us some online tools that you can use to examine this issue in your state and point us to some state actions on the topic. So let's start with Amy McIntosh.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I am going to review briefly an announcement that we made at the department last week that the Secretary made about what we're calling Excellent Educators for All, and it's a chance for states and districts to re-engage in the subject of what will it take to make sure that all kids, have an excellent educator for their schools. So I'm going to start with the problem. I'm thinking there may still be some participants who are listening only by phone, so I will try to be sure that I say the things that are on the slides if you can't see the slides, but I'm not going to read everything on the slide. With luck, there'll be a way you can go back and see anything that you missed. So I think many of you know that we do have a problem in our country where race and family income still too often predict who will have access to great teaching. We use some data in this presentation from Tennessee, not to pick on Tennessee, but because they've actually been brave enough to publish some data that shows a gap, shows that students in low poverty and low minority schools are much more often rated highly effective than those in high poverty, high minority schools. So if you are poor or minority, you're less likely to have a highly effective teacher in Tennessee, and you're more likely, if you're in a high poverty, high minority school, you are more likely, twice as likely in fact, to have a teacher who is rated ineffective. So that's just an illustration using one state. There is a Department of Ed study relatively recently that looked at 29 large school districts and found that in none of them were low-income students given access to more effective teaching or more frequent access to effective teaching than more well-to-do students. So there were gaps in every district. They ranged in size. There were some districts that had bigger issues than others, but in all cases, this was a problem. And this pattern holds when we look at other proxies for effective teaching. First-year teachers, even those who go on to be great teachers, are less effective in their first year. Most first-year teachers have a lot to learn, and when we find high minority and high poverty schools with a concentration of first-year teachers, it's a potential indication that there's an equity issue. And similarly, if you look at levels of teacher turnover, you'll find that high minority and high poverty schools are plagued with higher teacher turnover. So that describes the problem. There is a law on the books, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that requires all states to submit plans to the department that ensure that poor and minority children are not taught at higher rates than other children by inexperienced, unqualified, or out-of-field teachers. And since we know this remains a problem, and we know that there has not been as much of a concentrated focus on this recently, the Secretary made an announcement last week about the Excellent Educators for All initiative, which is a three-part strategy, and I'm going to talk about each part in the next slides. But the first part is the Secretary has now sent a letter to all the state education chiefs asking that they prepare and submit revised versions of educator equity plans by April of 2015. So that's part one. Part two is that we will provide some new sources of support for states in figuring out how to do this well. And we will also be providing some of the data. We're not going to require new data of states, but we are going to be providing back to them data that we have that sheds some light on where they might want to focus their efforts. So I'm going to go into each of those three parts in a little more detail. The first part is the request from the Secretary for new educator equity plans from every state. They'd be due on April of 2015. What they must do is they must be comprehensive in that the state must consider data from all their districts and across the state, and they must gather input from a range of constituents, including teachers, district leaders, and community groups. The department will issue more guidance this fall about what good plans look like, what we would encourage states to do and think about, and what the statute would require them to do and think about. So some of the questions you may have later, I will have to say we will tell you more this fall. I can say that under no circumstances will the department be dictating any particular strategy to address or improve equity, but we will expect that states have some strategies and make a commitment to publicly report about their progress periodically. So those are educator equity plans. In order to help with this, we are adding to the range of technical support we already do, and you're going to hear from AIR a little later about some of the terrific help that they already provide, but we're going to add $4.2 million from our Title II National Activities Fund and form an educator equity support network, which will begin work this fall and will be a collection of experts and expertise and resources who can provide states and districts with real-time support in developing and implementing their equity plans. So the network will bring together states and districts with national and local experts who will help states to understand, to liberate and analyze and understand their data, address the root causes of equity issues that may show up in districts or in states, and be very responsive to SEA's individual needs. The support network will be in a good position to share promising strategies that work in other places in similar contexts. Will help states to identify areas of opportunity where they want to provide additional support to their districts or their schools. The network will catalog effective practices in both analyzing and addressing problems here, and will be creating and providing tools, in addition to some of the things you're going to see later today, that SEAs can use in developing and implementing new educator equity plans. So there'll be a level of additional support for states and districts, and then the third part of the strategy is around what we're calling educator equity profiles and equity data that we want to make sure states have easy access to, because a good equity plan needs to start from an understanding of what is the current state of access to effective teaching, effective leadership. And we have some of the data, not all of the data, but we have some of the data that states might find helpful. So the first thing we will be doing is taking advantage of the fact that we have a civil rights data collection that we recently completed, and we will package the data that we've gotten from that for each state so that they will have a full copy of their data file. The data comes to us from districts, so while states could get it, it's possible they don't really have it, and we're going to provide it in a way that should be a little easier for them to work with. And that includes data on a range of important topics, not all of which are teacher equity related, but most relevantly, that includes data on teacher experience, teacher absenteeism, teacher certification, and teaching out of field. It also includes topics that go beyond directly where are teachers, but including things like access that students have to preschool and rigorous coursework, and there is some data on school expenditures and teacher salaries. So the full CRDC data files will be given to states to use as they see fit here, and we will be publishing for each state a simplified high-level educator equity profile that will, again, use the data that we've already collected both in the CRDC and in EdFacts, and we'll try to illustrate key equity gaps in each state using certain metrics of teacher equity, again, not the full story, but what's happening with access to effective instruction in high and low poverty schools, in high and low minority schools. Again, I can't say enough that this is not the full picture. This is simply the data that we have. So we will encourage states who want to construct a picture of their equity situation using other or additional data that they will be able to supplement what we have provided to them. So those are the three planks of this strategy. We have developed it over the course of certainly 6 months, maybe longer, by having, and I'm only here 6 months, so it's been going on since I've been here, having a lot of conversations with a range of partners. For those who can see the slide, the president is on this slide because we were lucky enough to have the president help us launch this last week. But our main partners, of course, are the state chiefs and chief state school officers and the organization that they work with, CCSSO, who is actually, I think, preparing and planning to announce some recommendations of their own to help chiefs. We have had terrific support from the two unions, and Randy Weingarten was able to join us last week as we announced this. We've been working closely with a range of civil rights groups, the Leadership Council on Civil and Human Rights, which is to some degree an umbrella organization, has been probably the leading group we've been working with, and Wade Henderson was able to stand with us last week as Arnie announced this. You are about to hear a great deal more about the Center for Great Teaching and Leading. And then we've also engaged directly with teachers and principals. In the announcement last week, we had invited 10 teachers and principals to come to our national launch event and talk to Randy and Arnie and Wade Henderson, and the president invited 4 of them to come and have lunch with him. So that is obviously not the only source of teacher input, but we thought it was important illustration that we think teacher voice, principal voice is critically important in each state and district as they wrestle with how to attract and keep the educators that high-needs schools really need. So again, I mentioned that the department will not prescribe any particular strategies. We know that this needs to be, locally developed solutions to challenges that differ very much from state to state, from district to district, from rural to urban, and so forth. But Arnie did editorialize some in his announcement based on things that we have heard from all those partners, that we think that the states who are going to be the most successful in making a difference are going to use approaches that go about attracting and retaining great teachers in high-needs schools and include things like a real focus on principals and on leadership. We certainly heard that from the teachers who were here last week. We need to help districts and schools facilitate teams of great teachers working together, providing time for them to collaborate, provide additional support in those early years when teachers still have so much to learn and can either master things or get completely frustrated with the whole profession, and so many leave too early. We imagine that solutions will make heavy use of career ladders for teachers and teacher leadership opportunities, and of course compensation for teachers and principals, especially those who are now accepting leadership opportunities and taking extra responsibility, either to go to a high-needs school, to stay in a high-needs school, or to take on leadership roles with their peers and with the kids, so that they can help keep students on track in these high-needs schools. So those are just examples of strategies that we know others have tried, and we imagine that some of the most successful states will draw on. But people who know even more than I do about what is being worked on and what is working come from AIR, and so I'm going to pass the ball immediately to our next speaker.
All right, thank you, Amy. Well, I'd like to first thank Amy and the department for raising this important issue to the forefront of the national policy agenda, as well as to thank the National Conference of State Legislatures for giving us the opportunity to share this with legislators who are always among the most important partners in making positive change for our schools. So I'll start by providing a little bit of background on our organization. Our mission at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders is to create a vibrant network of policymakers, practitioners, experts, leaders in the field, researchers, to bridge policy practice and research around improving teacher effectiveness and leader effectiveness, And we're based at American Institutes for Research, but are a collaboration of AIR as well as the Council of Chief State School Officers and Public Impact. We're funded by the U.S. Department of Education to provide free technical assistance and support to the system of regional centers and state education agencies. So the regional centers support the SEAs on all education topics, and the system of comprehensive centers provides support to the SEAs and regional centers on each of those, on various topics. So we're the center set up to provide that technical assistance on teacher and leader effectiveness. The Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, our work focuses in 6 different areas, one of which is equitable distribution of effective teachers and leaders. So that's what I'll be sharing with you today, some resources emerging from that line of our work. So our technical assistance revolves around 4 key areas. The first is online resources, and these can be accessed by anyone. We have some really exciting cutting-edge resources specifically around equitable distribution of effective teachers and leaders. The Center on Great Teachers and Leaders also can provide direct technical assistance to states, where we actually will go in over a period of time and help facilitate meetings, bring in experts, walk state teams through some of our online resources, as well as tools that we have that aren't posted for public use online. We also are going to be convening states on the issue of educator equity in January 2015, specifically to help them think through the comprehensive educator equity plans that Amy had mentioned. And then once states actually create those revised comprehensive educator equity plans, the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders staff will be available to review those and provide feedback. So on today's webinar, we'll go into a little bit more detail on the first 2 bullets here. Advance the slide, please. So here is some information about one of our new resources. It's called the Moving Toward Equity online resource. And you'll see on the slide, we have the URL. For those of you who might not be on the web but are on the phone, the address is www.gtl-center.org/learning-hub/moving-toward-equity. And on this site, we have just a ton of information organized in a very user-friendly way for states and other leaders to access information about each of the topics that you see in the graphic here. So understanding the problem of equitable distribution of teachers, setting priorities, raising awareness, taking action, and measuring progress and adjusting strategies. So this resource is meant to be an evolving repository of strategies and resources around equitable distribution of teachers and principals specifically. And it allows users to identify which stakeholder group they come from, be it a state, a regional center that supports states, a school district, a school, or an educator preparation program, and specific strategies that are relevant to that particular stakeholder group will pop up on the site. Next slide, please. So what you see here is just a snapshot of a printable tool that we have that summarizes the information on that online Moving Toward Equity tool. The printable version could be handed out at any convening or meeting related to this topic, but it presents information about the opportunity that we have to improve our schools through equitable access as that kind of door to begin those conversations, the challenge that is faced in this really complex issue area, and then the approach that the Moving Toward Equity tool takes, which is really to think deeply and comprehensively and thoroughly about the issue, particularly by starting off with the root cause analysis to really get at the bottom of what is leading to the inequities in access to effective teachers and leaders for students from poor and minority backgrounds. Next slide. So here we have a screenshot of the Moving Toward Equity tool. If you click on that first circle, the understanding the problem, you'll see it breaks down into a few more categories: measuring distribution, developing metrics to assess distribution, and analyzing and reporting data. And so you can click on those to get even more information. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see those same topics that were in that circular graphic. So the same thing happens where you can learn more, of course, if you click on the green setting priorities or the blue raising awareness categories. But if you go to the next slide, you can see a bit more about the taking action category. So here I just provided a screenshot of one particular area related to taking action around equitable distribution of effective teachers and leaders, and it's teacher assignment and transfer. You'll see you have some information that provides background on that area at the top of the page. But then when you look down, you see how you're able to identify which stakeholder group you're from, and then specific strategies will pop up that are relevant to you. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see teacher assignment and transfer is just one of various approaches under the taking action piece of the Moving Toward Equity tool. But I want to emphasize here that teacher assignment and transfer is, of course, a key part of equitable distribution of teachers, but this issue is not just about taking teachers and moving them into other schools. It really is about attracting effective talent, deploying and assigning talent effectively, developing all teachers to be more effective, and then retaining effective teachers as well. We want to be sure when developing strategies to address this issue to be thinking about unintended consequences that could emerge from certain types of approaches. For example, we've heard, at least in one case, of a teacher telling their principal that although they knew they were an excellent teacher and likely were going to be rated highly effective, that they actually did not want to be rated highly effective, that just the effective rating would suffice because they didn't want to be moved to a more challenging school down the road. So if we move to the next slide, our approach at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders is both to think deeply and long-term about this in terms of those unintended consequences, and also comprehensively. So all of the strategies that we're recommending are captured in this talent development framework, which we provide technical assistance to states around within or separately from the equitable teacher distribution work that they might be doing. But here you can see a range of different areas where attention ought to be paid. It's not about choosing the area that matters the most or having a fight about whether it's fundamentally about better teacher preparation or better teacher compensation. Instead, it's about looking at comprehensively at all of these strategies across the career continuum that matter for attracting, developing, and retaining effective teachers. Next slide. So we have these various online tools, but for us it's more about, it's not only about providing resources and tools that people can access and review, but actually sparking conversations and getting teams of leaders from a state together to think through this issue and develop strategies collaboratively that will work in their context. And so we have a workbook that we are able to use in a technical assistance context, and it takes state teams that ideally would include legislators as well as cross-team departments, cross-department teams from the SEA and other state-level agencies, possibly a few large school district superintendents, and to get them together over the course of 6 months or a year and really dig in to this issue. And so the 8 steps that are included in this process are first to really specify the equitable distribution challenge, just to be really clear as to what fundamentally the problem is, so that everyone who's working on the issue in the state can be on the same page and also clearly communicate the challenge to others in a consistent way. Then the second step is to identify the root causes behind the equitable distribution challenges. And in this part of the process, we draw on the Carnegie Institute's improvement sciences work, where a team will identify a few root causes to the problem, and then they go through a process of really asking, well, why? Why is that a problem? And when they identify further root causes as to why certain root causes are in existence, you continually ask, well, why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? And eventually you get the full range of root causes behind the inequities in the access that students from poor and minority backgrounds have to effective teachers and leaders. And having identified all of those root causes, the third step is to categorize those causes to make it all a little bit more manageable. Step 4 is then to visualize them. We have what's called a fishbone diagram, and you kind of plug in the information from steps 1, 2, and 3 to create a visual, which then can really be used by the team, again, to make sure everyone's on the same page, seeing this very complex and challenging issue in the same light, and also is able to communicate, again, the challenge and the root causes behind it to others. And then step 5 is to determine strategies for addressing this. So you'll see, so typically people want to jump immediately to step 5, and they want to start identifying those strategies to address equitable distribution to teachers. But what we're trying to promote is really first understanding the nature of the problem and its root causes before jumping to the strategies. And so as Amy had mentioned, there's no single strategy that's going to work across the country. There's a whole bunch of different possible strategies, and our Moving Toward Equity tool outlines what we think is all of them, and we certainly plan to continue adding strategies as we hear of more. And the goal is really to have teams think about what is most likely to be successful and feasible in their own state context. Step 6 is to create a theory of action. Step 7 is to determine how progress towards rectifying equitable distribution problems will be measured. And then step 8 is to put the action plan into motion. So this is the sort of process that the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders could walk states through in a series of face-to-face meetings. Next slide. So we have additional tools that we're able to bring to states, and that states can then share with districts as well. Here's just an example of one. It's a menu of different metrics for assessing equitable access to effective teachers. So I know it's a little bit small, but you can see that the columns are all schools, high poverty schools, low poverty schools, and then the differential between high and low poverty schools. And then what you see here is just a sample of metrics. There's many more in the menu that we have, but there's metrics about teacher preparation. And here you see the percent of teachers teaching outside of their licensure area, the percent of teachers on a provisional license, and so on. Then metrics about attracting teachers, such as the number of applicants per teaching vacancy, metrics about developing teachers, and then there's also metrics about retaining teachers. So next slide. Whatever metrics are selected, we then are available to help a state think through the clearest ways to report and communicate the status of equitable access. So it might be a bar chart, as you see here, or it might be a map, as you'll see on the next slide. So this slide, I want to emphasize, is purely for illustrative purposes. You can tell from the shape of the state that this is Massachusetts, but the data are not representative of all Massachusetts educators by any means. It just was a subset of data that they had available. So don't look at this in terms of thinking about what is happening in the state of Massachusetts, but this map is just one way to help folks visualize, given that 60% of people are visual learners, visualize equitable distribution or inequitable distribution and communicate it more widely. So what you see here are the green circles where the size represents the percentage of teachers who are rated exemplary. So the larger circles are districts that have more exemplary teachers. And then the districts are color-coded by poverty level. So the darker the district, the greater percentage of students are on free or reduced price lunch. And of course, a tool like this could also be created for a district at the district level where the schools are the circles, and a district can see how well teachers are distributed across their high poverty or high minority schools. Next slide. In addition to these tools and resources and direct technical assistance, we have a blog specifically focused on equitable access to effective teachers. It's called the Great Teachers and Leaders for All Learners blog. And as your states begin to implement new strategies that relate to this issue, we would be delighted to share that more widely with other states through our blog. We already have a number of excellent pieces that have been submitted, some of which you can see here on the slide. Next slide. And then a final resource that we have is called the Innovation Station. And this is a place where we house the most cutting edge information about recruiting teachers, retaining teachers, selecting them, rewarding them through compensation and other incentives, and then also this issue of extending the reach of your most effective teachers. So feel free to check this out, and as well as to add resources that you might come across in your own work, since we're constantly updating the Innovation Station. Next slide. So in terms of what's happening around the country at the state level, right now, there's actually not that much to say. So the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders is the successor of the National Comprehensive Center for Teacher Quality, the TQ Center. And the TQ Center was very active in supporting states as they developed their teacher equity plans back in 2007. And what emerged out of that experience was that states didn't really feel it was a meaningful exercise until they had data about teacher effectiveness rather than solely HQT data and data about teacher experience. And so work around equitable distribution of teachers halted a little bit while the country focused for the last 5 years or so on developing teacher evaluation systems that are intended to really get at effectiveness. And so now that those systems are being implemented, even though there's still some way to go there, the attention is turning again, as it should, to equitable distribution of teachers. But there's not a whole lot to report in terms of innovative states around this so far. But just a few states worth highlighting quickly are Delaware. They have a talent cooperative initiative where they use financial incentives of $10,000 per year to place effective teachers in some of their most high-need schools, but they combined that with other initiatives. One was to create statewide professional learning communities and statewide teacher advisory councils to really elevate teacher voice in determining what this policy would look like. They also, in developing it, conducted focus groups around the state and developed it as a collaboration of about a dozen or so different organizations. And then they also, at the same time, implemented a working conditions survey called TEL, Teacher Empowerment and Leading and Learning, I think. And so they just this past week put out their preliminary results, and it does seem that the schools that are implementing, the high-need schools that are implementing this initiative are in fact seeing quite significantly higher teacher retention rates than other schools. Ohio is interesting in that they had developed a specific Office of Educator Equity at the state level. I'm not sure if it actually exists right now, but I know it was in existence for a number of years following the earlier focus on equitable distribution. And during that time, they produced a number of useful resources related to equitable distribution. They also had us come in to train a number of their districts on human capital management systems thinking, which is that idea that it's not about finding a silver bullet or creating piecemeal policies, but rather looking comprehensively at the whole system of attracting talented teachers and leaders to the profession, recruiting them strategically, hiring them appropriately, implementing induction and mentoring programs, professional learning, evaluation, having attractive, competitive compensation, and collegial school cultures. And then Ohio also has recently put money towards providing $20,000 bonuses, but over 5 years, so $4,000 per year, for teachers specifically in the STEM subject areas in high-need schools in particular. And then in North Carolina recently, after the governor had promoted implementing career ladders for teachers, and then the House unanimously passed some legislation that was really modeled after public impact's opportunity culture model of extending the reach of effective teachers through various ways that reconfigure staffing in schools so that it's possible to pay excellent teachers 20 to 50% more by putting them in positions where they reach more learners and more, as well as teachers. They might be a team leader of teachers who's actually held accountable for the performance of other teachers' students. Their other models also include blended learning, elementary school specialization, and in some cases at a teacher's, with the teacher's approval, increasing their class size and paying them more accordingly. And so the North Carolina model would have put effective teachers in front of 75% of students in the state, and it's currently awaiting action in the Senate. But we are certainly interested in highlighting strategies that other states are evolving, so I would love to hear from any of you if you have information that can be shared that we can bring to other states. Part of the mission of the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders is to share strategies across, not only between researchers and practitioners and policymakers, but also across states, so that states can be learning from one another and not always reinventing the wheel or duplicating mistakes, and certainly sharing success stories and lessons learned. So if you turn to the next slide, you have my contact information there. And again, I would be very happy to hear about what other states are doing to address equitable distribution of teachers, maybe having you write a blog or a colleague of yours, or adding information that is produced in your state to our innovation station. And with that, I think we can move on to questions.
Yes, thanks. And we did have 2 questions that have been sent in, one for each of our presenters. So I'll start with a question for Amy, since Ellen's just spoken. Amy, can the department clarify which teachers need to be equitably distributed? Are you referring to highly qualified teachers, effective teachers? And what about states that don't have evaluation systems fully implemented yet?
Right. So I understand why everyone's asking that question. So the current law requires that states ensure that poor and minority students are not taught at a higher rate by inexperienced, out of field, or unqualified, not in that order. So let me say it again, unqualified, out of field, inexperienced teachers. so the law requires that plans address that topic. The law does not actually require any particular measure. States get to define the measures that they think best address that topic, and certainly through guidance and through technical assistance, we will encourage states to use the insight they have from whatever data they choose and want to, because, you know, as you've seen in the great work from AIR, there's a lot of really important ways to tackle this problem. Our requirement is that plans at least address how to resolve any issues between inexperienced, out of field, and unqualified. But we certainly encourage, and by the way, not just teachers, principals, and, you know, so we think that states who want to make a difference for kids will think very thoughtfully about what specific measures and the range of measures that tell the story they need to tell to make the progress they need to make. But our plans require at a minimum that you address those three considerations.
Thanks for that. And I kind of have a follow-up question that's just been sent in. And to remind everybody, you can enter a question in the chat box if you'd like to do that. What's the impact of this work on states with recently renewed or approvals or extensions of their NCLB waivers? Can you comment on that?
Sure. So this requirement, the Secretary's request for new equity plans, was made to all 50 states and is really independent of whether a state has a waiver, whether they have been extended recently, whether they're still waiting to be extended. And so I know there was a lot of speculation in the press about renewal and how this affects renewal of waivers. This is a requirement under the law, has been there, has always been there, and we're asking all states to look at their current context and their current situation and make a new commitment to make a difference here.
Thank you for that. And I have a question specifically for Ellen, although Amy, if you have any thoughts, you'd be welcome to add that. But Ellen, you laid out some interesting state strategies, but how would you bring state legislators into this? Would you encourage the state education agencies and local education agencies to bring legislators in as teams from a discussion from the start? Or what kinds of things is AIR doing to encourage SEAs and LEAs to bring legislators in as partners?
Absolutely. This, more than any other issue, is one where it's so critical to have legislators and all key stakeholders involved in the conversation, because it is one that is very complex. It's a financial issue. It has implications for, it's political, very values-laden, and there's just root causes as well as implications at all levels of the system, at the state level and at the regional level and the local level. And so having legislators involved really is crucial. As for how to get them to the table, I'd love to ask you that. I think SEAs and certainly in conversations I've had with teacher leaders, there's a lot of interest in having more dialogue with legislators. And so I think the question is more how to ensure that legislators are able to find the time to be part of these conversations. One tool that we have developed at AIR is called Everyone at the Table. You can find out more at www.everyoneatthetable.org. The tool was created to bring teachers more to the dialogue around these policy issues that so centrally affect teachers, but the same exact tools that you see on the website are also applicable to legislators or really any group that is going to be part of this topic. The purpose of those resources are to not have the folks shy away from, but actually just delve right into the toughest topics. And rather than have those conversations turn into debates or evoke hostility, the tools create structured dialogues to keep a solutions-oriented dialogue that helps kind of pull out all the values behind the different opinions that people have on these very challenging topics, and to then focus on finding common ground rather than finding someone who's right and someone who's wrong. And we've found them in our work with teachers, at least, to be very effective. And so that would be a tool that could certainly be used to bring in legislators as well.
That's a great idea, and thanks so much for that. I did want to get Amy a chance to follow up. I think there was a question that she wanted to follow up on, and before I do that, just a reminder, we are running a little bit over. We started a little bit late, so if someone has a burning question that they want to get into the chat room, please do it now. But Amy, I think you had some follow-up thoughts about which teachers need to be equitably distributed, and that would be a good time to share.
So, and I don't mean to pick on the questioner, but the framing of the question, which teachers need to be equitably distributed, seems to come from a place that we hear a lot that's a misperception or a misconception about what this work is about. We hear a lot that this work is about taking teachers who are good, experienced, effective, wonderful, whatever verb and metric you want to use, taking those people away from low needs kids and moving them to high needs kids. Now, there are a few states who have had some luck incentivizing teachers to transfer to high needs schools, but under no circumstances is this strategy about finding the best teachers and then moving them around. We always hear the forced transfer. There's nothing that's going to be effective or successful about forced transfers. This is about making sure that the kids who need need access to great teaching get it, and get it at least the same rate that other kids do. Now, you know, as the Secretary pointed out when he launched this, there are plenty of countries who think that high needs kids should have greater access to the best teachers because they need them the most. But this is about make sure that there's at least equal access, and it's not about robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think what you just heard from AIR is there's lots and lots of strategies that, you know, leave Peter whole and make Paul better off.
Well, I think that's an excellent challenge to end the call on, and I want to thank Amy, and I want to thank Ellen, and I want to let you know my contact information if you have any questions about NCSL work on teacher issues and federal issues. Please let me know, and I'll get them to the right NCSL staff person. And also, we will be posting this webinar, so you will have access to the presentation and the audio as well. So please take advantage of that, and I think that then this concludes our call.